Do you edit these things before you post them?
I don't, but I might trim the ends, but it's unedited. So yeah. So as I was saying earlier, I forgot to push the record button, and Sam, I started talking. So
that's all my best stuff, man.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't believe that for a second, but yeah, this is episode 19 of Going South, an attempt to have conversations in the Deep South. Sam Dennis is my guest and friend here, and I thought we went to school together, but I just discovered we didn't. Sam is an attorney here. How long have you been practicing law?
This is year 26, man.
Holy cow. Went to Magdalen College in Oxford?
Well, right? Yeah, for a semester.
Gotcha.
Studied
law school in Arkansas?
Graduated from Arkansas. Gotcha. Term in Macon at Mercer, my last term.
Okay.
Also studied in Lansing, Michigan at Thomas Cooley Law School as well.
Okay, cool.
So
and did you
the theory was I kept moving so nobody could ever really figure it out, right?
I got you. So when you got out of law school, because I want to come back to football just like, did you immediately hang your shingle up, or were you in a local firm?
Well, I went to work locally for a law firm, for a lawyer. And so technically that's like hanging a shingle, except I worked under another lawyer for about 7 years. And then I bought my building down here on Patterson Street. And that was October the 1st, 2001. And we've been here since then. Gotcha. I finally got around to remodeling the restrooms and kitchen this past year.
I got you. So you do like criminal defense, some family law, I think, is that right?
I don't, a very little bit family law now. If you don't mind, I'll tell a quick story. Most of what I'm doing now is personal injury, and it's road wrecks, catastrophic injuries, some medical malpractice, and nursing home litigation, that sort of thing. Not weirdly, but it's people, for decades, lawyers were given this false reputation of just being ambulance chasers.
Yeah, I was fixing to say, yeah.
Well, I mean, there are some that are that way. There's no doubt about it. But, we were talking a minute ago about Valdosta and all that. This is my home and my community. I was born and raised here, and I'm the fourth generation of Lebanese men in this community, and we've all made our livings here and raised our families here. And what I would say is, being involved from the standpoint of being interested in public safety, interested in the way in which our community interacts with each other, the fact that people get injured or victimized by sometimes a person that just runs a stop sign or something, but can do catastrophic damage that way. And then there are those corporations and businesses that come to our community, or even maybe we're born here, that somehow became, I call them radicalized, and get to the point that they think they can just suck money out of a community without a whole lot of responsibility back for their actions. I do see what we do as very important, and it goes all the way back to our founding fathers and the 7th Amendment and the right to a jury trial and the common law civil remedies that were provided back in England. All the way back to the Magna Carta, stopping the king from taking property, right? And so that's part of our rich American heritage that I frankly feel honored and privileged to be a part of right here in Valdosta, to be able to practice law in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do a lot of criminal defense because of the 6th Amendment, and we can have that conversation. Yeah. I love it. Yeah, I'm a weirdo, man. I study and read those things.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I appreciate it. I want to go back to I would love to hear the history, because I know, the Georges, I have other friends that are of Lebanese heritage, but I don't know what was going on in the late 17th century and early 18th. What happened? Because that history I've never heard. Like, how in the hell did Lebanese folks end up in the swamps of South Georgia?
Well, so, you got to think about it sort of in two parts, right? You had Lebanon that was under siege by Turkey and late 1800s, and King Muhammad was his name. Is that right? Yeah, King Muhammad the Fifth is what's on my great-grandfather's naturalization papers, because it says that my great-grandfather is now no longer a subject of King Muhammad V of the Ottoman Turkish Empire.
Gotcha.
Because my great grandfather had to reject that, and of course to become a United States citizen when he was naturalized.
So they're escaping imperialism.
Absolutely, and Lebanon's been enslaved for hundreds of. It didn't exist until the French Mandate post World War One, right? So, but the Lebanese people have been there since Jesus, or before. The Pentecost, if that whole biblical story, which as Christians we believe in, actually happened in southern Lebanon, which is where Hezbollah was in their freedom fight, or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
I'm not a big student of that, but my point is that you have that all going on and folks are escaping. What I have learned later in life is to understand that a lot of those sorts of immigration waves are religious, they're religious sort of in nature, because when the Muslims come into the Lebanese region, and Syria is what it was in fact, at our local cemetery, there's a Syrian plot, is where some of my relatives are buried. There was a whole conversation about whether, when the French mandated Lebanon, where they wanted to be called Lebanonia or Lebanon. It had to deal with racism. It had to do with whether we were going to be referred to as Lebanese people or Lebanonian people.
Gotcha.
Lebanese sound too much like Chinese or Vietnamese, right? It was an interesting conversation to me. Lebanese Syrian Club locally was having that conversation in the early 1920s and 30s. Now, having said, or teens probably, but having said that, so the Christians at the time that could get out, my family was all Christian, which meant Catholic, because there were Protestant churches around there, because all the Protestantism went west from Germany, right, at the time. And so having said, so folks came to the United States because you were free, and you could make a living for your family, and you could make it or break it on your own, right? And so,
well, what year are we talking about when your first generation folks were here?
I sadly don't know, and I don't know. None of us in our family.
Well, the reason I ask, the reason I ask, there were a number of, I don't know if it applied to the Syrians, but I knew Greeks and other folks weren't considered citizens because you had to be white to be a citizen, I think up to 1892. So were they naturalized after that, or how did
yes, way after that? I'll have to find my great grandfather's naturalization papers are in my safe, and I don't, be honest with you, I don't remember the date, and it was waited. Well, I wouldn't say waited, but it took a long time, because back then you had to learn to read and write English, and no one was interpreting for you or whatever.
Right. But a lot of folks don't know there were racial restrictions on citizenship.
That's right. They were, but post that, and I'm sure it was after that when my folks came, but post that, when they got here, there was a real concern. We were still fresh off the Civil War, even though 30 to 40 years later, people, it's still, there were people alive that were still probably working as quasi-slaves at that point. And so it was still very fresh in the culture of our country. But so you had sort of in my mind, you have sort of two things to think about. It's bad where you are, and it promises to be better where you're going. Right. And so
and I don't think most people think about that in terms of the immigrant story, right? That most people like what it means to uproot, especially if you uproot everybody you can to escape a situation. So that's not a decision that's lightly made, I imagine.
No, I don't think so either. And I have a family member that recently texted me. We were having a conversation about politics, and that family member said something to me about the caravans that are currently being talked about, I guess.
Right.
I didn't know anything about it, so I looked it up. And what I said to this family member was exactly what you said. I said, I know when you talk to a guy like me, you'll figure out that we'll just go all over the place.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right.
Stop me indirectly when you need to. But the thing for me was, I thought, I put myself in the shoes of that immigrant, and I suspect there are some people that we would not want here. I totally get that, but
we've got some folks here that
well, there's some folks who don't want you and me here.
There's some folks that don't want me here too, right?
But the fact is, for a guy like me, I put myself in that average, what I consider to be that average immigrant shoes, and I think I've got 3 children and a wife, and just recently lost my 96.
Yeah, my condolences, man.
Thank you. And I would have, what a hard decision to pick up and say, I'm going to go to a place where I don't speak the language. And, here I'm a lawyer, but there I may have to cut grass or clean a house or whatever. Yeah. I mean, that's heavy to me. My great grandfather, when he got here, very little is known about what he did in Lebanon before he left. So I don't really know. Although we think he was in the food business, but we're not sure. And it's kind of in our blood because we had a grocery store and all that. But when he got here, he literally put a big burlap bag on his back full of dry goods, and he traded goods, and he walked from farm to farm, and he has slept in lots of the old barns and stuff around here before. He didn't have a house, anything. Wow. Made money, went back to Lebanon and got his wife, and came back and had their children here. You know what I mean? And then on South Patterson Street by the railroad tracks, But I mean, that's who we were, and I mean, they built a life there, and opened a small dime store, and then, or whatever, penny store probably at the time, and then you know what I mean. So they did what most people did at that time, which was to try to live that American dream. But you have to leave your familiar culture and your familiar
language, the whole 9 yards.
Language and the people, and to look like everybody there, and then not. Now you ask, how did they get to Valdosta or whatever?
Yeah, why here is what I'm really curious about.
Because
it's not just y'all's family, right? There are other Lebanese folks, like I said.
Oh, listen, you can go to anywhere. Like we trade stories about people. And Facebook's been wonderful for this, because I met someone last night that's from on Facebook on a Lebanese food page, right? Somebody put something that
talking about good food
on, and they said something about knowing the Josephs in Valdosta, and the lady from Canada said, "Well, where's Valdosta?" And then I got in the middle of it, of course, and then lo and behold, I think we're cousins. Distantly.
Yeah.
Still, if you're Lebanese, you're cousins to every sort of feel. But my point in saying that is that the Lebanese, the saying is that if you took everybody that's Lebanese and put them back in Lebanon, they'd fall into the Mediterranean because there's not room to hold them all.
Yeah. But why Georgia? Why Valdosta?
Well, and so this was the way it worked. And so there was it was a little more organized than people give credit for it. Back then you had to have someone sponsor you. Mm-hmm. So, and there was a man by the last name George, a Lebanese man, who my great-grandfather was allowed to say, I'm being sponsored by him. Well, you had to go there. So wherever Mr. George was, you had to go to Valdosta. That's where he was. And the reason that they did that was because Lebanese people typically back then were in the textile business. They would open up grocery stores, liquor stores, much like you see the Indian and Pakistani
doing now. Yeah.
And so the idea back then was pick a trade that takes care of one of your basic needs. Liquor doesn't really do that.
Yeah.
But so you're in the hotel business, you're in the food business, you're in the clothing business, right? And then you educate your kids and get them up and let them do something different or better or whatever. All right. Well, Lebanese were pretty loyal to each other. And so we wouldn't go open a grocery store where there already was one. And so that's how we kind of dispersed.
Gotcha.
Right? So you wouldn't go open a store and compete with Mr. George.
Yeah.
Someone would come here and compete with the Dennises.
Yeah.
Dennises have that town already sewn up. Let's go to the next town.
Gotcha.
What happened is you find Lebanese communities in Thomasville, and then of course in Tallahassee or in Madison or whatever. And that's a neat piece of our history, I think.
Yeah.
You ought to find interesting because your last name's George, and I'm dying to know if you have any Lebanese in you now that we're talking about this.
It's weird. I don't know. I was adopted, so it's a little weird.
Yeah.
But most of my ancestors are Scotch and Irish.
Your genetic ancestors or your
Yeah. Well, no, my genetic ancestors are like German and English and Irish.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but my adopted family are Scots and Irish folks.
So
But I know Carters here that are Lebanese. I know George's here that are Lebanese. Was your great grandfather's last name Dennis though? Did he change?
Well, it was Anglicanized, and that's an interesting story, which I'll tell you in a second. But to talk about last names, when they Anglicanized their names when they got here, and the reason I mentioned that your last name is George, if you see or meet someone that's Lebanese and you meet someone that looks Middle Eastern like I do,
yeah,
and their last name is a first name, usually a saint, doesn't have to be, or some biblical name, but so Dennis is a first name, George is a first name, Moses is a first name, Joseph, Thomas, Carter. You can, it's, there's a reason behind that. So these were a people that through having their government stripped from them over and over and over again and being enslaved over and over and over again, and then coming out of that with a lot to prove, with wanting to be independent and wanting to be on their own and wanting to be productive and successful folks. They also wanted to be loyal to each other. So in a group, hey, I'm Sam Dennis. Hey, I'm Noel George. We don't have to say anything now. We know. We know we're on the same team, right?
Yeah.
And so the Syrians and the Palestinians, and I mean, they didn't do the French. I mean, nobody did that, the Lebanese did, which I found to be kind of unique and neat as a way of just sort of identifying each other in a new, somewhat scary time,
Yeah. Well, I think like with any kind of ethnic enclave or ethnic community, folks do lean on each other, right? Especially when they're first generation coming into a new place. Did your family, this is a stupid question, but did you hear of any stories of discrimination, of racism here?
Oh yeah, there was not to us personally, but I need to find it actually. There's a podcast that I sent to my cousins recently. And it was about a Lebanese family who opened a grocery store, and the local merchants got mad at him and his family. One thing leads to another, and they, of course, they get taken down to Madison, Florida or something and hung from an oak tree or whatever. And it was rough for some of them, not all of them. And I do remember family members telling me that that you had to be careful. Like you couldn't stand out. You couldn't, you had to make your living, but not
flaunt it or.
Yeah. You couldn't really you don't drive the fancy car when it came out. Don't have the fanciest house.
Wow.
And because it was like you had to, I mean, I took it as sort of like you had to kind of know your place. Right.
Yeah.
And that is unjust. It's not right. But I also get it as a moment in history, that a lot of people were coming from all over the world to be part of this country. And, I think when cultures mesh, it's always a challenge,
Yeah.
But
don't you think it's weird though? I mean, this is the thing that's interesting to me about our country. I think it's the greatest experiment in human freedom.
Yeah,
right. Like we're going to see how that turns out. Right. But, but like, I just find it interesting that my Irish and Scottish ancestors came here. And I don't know if you know how Valdosta was founded, but basically the Creek people were run off, killed, and so forth. And then there was a lottery for the land that only white men could participate in. It was all kind of, sectioned up, and you drew names to get the land after everybody had been killed. So the Irish come and the Scottish come, run off the folks that were here, but there weren't really people, right? And then they set up a legal system that then determines who can come here. But you know what I mean? Like it's interesting as humans that, and the Irish were, considered black legally. in places. Most folks don't know this. I mean, they weren't considered white. There's a whole process by which various ethnic groups from all over the country became white. They
Yeah,
weren't initially white legally, right? And the law determined who was a citizen or not. But then, so that group, the Irish, caught hell. But what do they do?
no, that's right. That's
you know,
whoever, the old saying, "I got mine now, screw you."
yeah, it's your turn, right?
Yeah, and they always turn around and hit the guy behind them.
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked about your name is Saleem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it means peace.
Yeah. And so, and that's what I am, as a peacemaker.
Well, that's such a great name for, Mark really, I don't even know if Mark means anything. I was told.
I mean, well, it's got to mean something. Jesus, chose him as a disciple, right?
Yeah, well, those four gospels, right? But yeah, so
that's sweet of you and kind of you to look that up and to be that prepared for this morning. I appreciate that.
I'm not very prepared, but I was curious.
You don't have to be, because I'll talk to a post.
I was just looking at your website for your practice, and it was on there, and I just did a little digging, and I just think names are powerful. I think words are powerful, languages, and a lot of us don't think about what other folks do and give up to be a part of the American dreams, especially changing religions oftentimes, not that y'all did, but changing names, anglicizing, as you said, which is really about leaving culture behind in order to be in a place, in order to minimize conflict. I mean, it's important stuff.
It is, and it's deeply rooted in our Christian heritage, right? I mean, Jesus was essentially born an immigrant, right?
Yeah.
So we're it's important, you're right, to bring that up and remember that as part of our DNA. And, you asked if my great grandfather's name was Dennis. His name was Jim Dennis. That was the name, right?
Wow.
The old safe that he, the first safe he bought, and said, it's got engraved on there, or painted on there, because that was a big deal back then to have a safe, because you got something to put in it, right?
Yeah.
It was, but it's got on there J. Dennis and Son. And so it was for my grandfather, who was Sam. So they called me Sam. I was named after a great uncle who passed away, I don't know, probably when I was 10 or 12 years old. But Saleem from Lebanon, Saleem Raya was his name, is my mom's side. And he was, best I can tell, like, there are people second generation behind him now that how awesome he was, right? So that makes me happy to know that he was such a great guy. When Jim Dennis got here, his God-given, or his parents gave him the name of Habib Saad Sawaya, Sawaya. That's important to me because I started researching, right? My dad and I loved genealogy as much as we could ascertain, because there are no records from way back then.
Yeah.
So we went to his grave, and that's in Arabic, that's on his gravestone. And we know that. So he gave that name up as a grown man and just called himself Jim Dennis. I mean, it was as vanilla as you can get, right? That's and deep. So, maybe if I went to Mexico, I'd be.
Yeah, I guess
I don't know what you would do.
Yeah,
but
well, no, I get it. I get your point. Like, I think that the thing I think about is what people do to assimilate here. And I think the thing that always scares me, having lived almost 60 years now, is that, and knowing a little bit about our history. I mean, when we talk about Japanese folks on the West Coast who did this, it's a similar story, right? And they're doing everything perfectly. They're model people. And then there's Pearl Harbor. And then all of a sudden their lives change, right?
And they're determined.
One of the things I was going to ask you, and again, we didn't plan on what we were going to talk about, but this is fascinating. Where was I? I was in Atlanta when 9/11 happened. At first I was teaching in Texas when the Oklahoma bombing happened.
Oh, wow.
And my students who were Arabic a couple of them were like verbally assaulted because the assumption was a Muslim did it, right? Right.
They even talked about, if you remember the early news
Oh,
reports,
yeah.
I remember.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Right.
I was a little bit frustrated. I was
Right.
like,
Right.
oh, we don't know yet. Hold on.
I had students that couldn't buy gas at gas stations because people refused it, right? And then I had students at 9/11. And again, these are third generation people.
I know.
You know, third generation people. So I think the reason I bring it up is just to acknowledge kind of the danger of it. The same thing happened when 9/11 with my students. And it wasn't just my students of Arab descent. It was my Mexican American students that people thought were of Arab descent. You know
That's
what I mean?
right. No, I mean,
All
that's
of a
right.
sudden, everybody's a suspect that's not white. You know, my ex-wife is Latina, and she's
Yeah.
about your complexion.
Yeah.
And I was
She's beautiful then, I can tell you that.
Oh, yeah, yeah, she is and was. But what was fascinating, she was at Emory in grad school at the time, working on her doctorate, and I was worried about her getting home, you know, because she had had a number of encounters with people anyway that assumed that she was Arabic. Right. So I just say this to acknowledge, like, the folks that usually immigrate to the US usually are model Americans, right? Know more about America. I mean, you got to take the citizenship test, know stuff that native born Americans don't know. But I think the thing that I'm always precarious about is geopolitical events, you know, can undermine people's legitimacy in ways that is really unfair, even though we've always been a multicultural society.
You're right. And and you're seeing that struggle right now with, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of my white friends who would find themselves to say that about themselves that they're very conservative politically. I'm starting to see on Facebook and all this outrage that they're being lumped into this category of these white terrorists who attacked the Capitol.
Yeah.
It's not right to do that. Okay. Though it's interesting, just as a study. I mean, I just look back and watch. It's interesting to me. And the thing that I wish we could all, as humans in this country, agree on, and I know that I've got a lot of life experience, but I still find myself very naive and childlike in some of the thoughts that I have. And I mean that.
Oh, me too.
I just am. I mean, I just look up and I think, you know, at the end of the day, this all boils down to contempt or anger and how we direct and use it. And like, it's okay to be angry. Jesus was angry at times, but it's what you do with it, right? Yeah. And so, to me, just a blanket sort of, I'm going to hate Arabs or I'm going to hate white people. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So there are tons of people that feel that way, I guess, and maybe they're misguided or misdirected. I'm saying that to say this, that in this country, learning how to not have contempt for those of us that are different in some way is probably the single biggest thing we can do in this country, because it's hard to me, right, to know or to understand why people get so blended or absorbed with their political parties or their religions. You know, it's like I'm a devout Catholic and I have certain specific beliefs that I've accepted as a Catholic man, right? And they're real to me and they're true to me, and I love those beliefs and they hold me up in everyday life. But I have a firm, clear understanding that I will never project that onto you, right? I will never hold you to that standard or be mad at you because you may have studied Catholicism and didn't agree with it. That's perfectly fine with me.
I would say it's American too. It's a separation of state and religion.
Well, it is. And I think too, to not just separate state and religion, that's a huge deal for me. For the religion more than the state.
No, I get you. I just bring it up because what I don't understand among my conservative brothers and sisters who claim to be American, right? Who claim to be constitutionalist, right? Well, I talked to an evangelical friend recently who, started going on this kind of tear about the attack on prayer. And I was explaining, I don't think there's an attack on prayer. I think there's a concern about state institutions endorsing a religion. And that's a very constitutional thing. So it's a constitutional thing. It's not anything aimed at you as an evangelical Christian. So I think there's that, but also Christianity is based on a Middle Eastern man. like, like I'm fascinated.
I hate to tell you this, but he probably looked more like me than you.
Oh, absolutely, right.
Bother you a little bit.
No, he was not a white boy. It's geographically impossible for him to be a white, blue-eyed, blonde guy, right?
No.
Right. But I think that's the thing I struggle with is, where is the folks who claim to be following Jesus? Where is the love, the comment on Samaritans, the fact that we're all children of the same family? Where does all that go for some of the most outspoken people who claim to hold that faith tradition? And and that's not to slam anybody. It's just something that I'm grappling with and wanting to talk to people about.
Well, I think I've been where you are, and I think I've moved away from that a little bit for this reason. I had a great uncle who was an archbishop in the Melkite Rite, R-I-T-E, the Melkite Rite Church, Christian, for whoever watches this or listens to it, probably the first church, even before the Greek Orthodox. The Melkite was in southern Lebanon. It was in Antioch when Peter started it in a cave. That's where the Melkites got their birth, okay? And it's a Lebanese religion, but in communion with the Holy See of Rome. So it's a Catholic rite, all right? And claim.
Does it answer to the Vatican?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It has a patriarch or a bishop, but their patriarch answers to the Pope, okay? Sort of technically on equal terms, but it's the Catholic Church invented politics. So you just got to remember that. And, remember that there's always flexing going on among the higher ups, right? So but what I'm going to tell you about Uncle Joe, everybody else kissed his ring and I just said Uncle Joe, which always made me feel special, right? One of the greatest men I ever knew was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize and died before it was awarded. He did not get it. It was not awarded to him. But he was that much of a consequential figure in his life. And he had a church in Birmingham where he introduced my mom and dad and same time and then married them. But I say that because he got kicked by the KKK. He let African Americans come in the front door of his church, and that was a no-no back then. He marched with Martin Luther King. So he was relevant. He was I think in lots of people's minds. But he taught me something years ago, and I'll never forget it. And he said that God is not an old gray-haired man in the sky. God is relationship. Mm-hmm. And I've carried that with me for 30 some odd years now. And he's right. He is 100% correct. And what that means to me is this. I said earlier, I don't remember if we were recording or not, that I think that in our culture, the United States of America now, and we can talk about, and I have my own theories as to why this is the way it is, but we consume everything, right?
I would say we're a nation of consumers, not citizens, in a way.
Well, I think you're right. No, I think that's 100% correct. The fact is that we consume things that we've never in humanity ever consumed before in all of human history. And that's religion, politics, information, just news. I mean, just what are the facts? Well, we don't even know what the facts are anymore.
Yeah, and it's nonstop as well, right?
Yeah, it's 24 hours a day. And so I'm saying that to say this. What that does is it tends to gin up misunderstandings, right? And wrong understandings. And so if your worldview is that God is an old gray-haired man in the sky and he hates people that vote Democrat, well, then it's almost impossible to talk to you. And vice versa. If you're consumed to the point that anyone like me who is a devoted religious man, then my liberal friends would, who are many of whom are atheists, I mean, they mock me and they laugh at me and say what I have to say is relevant, right? And so, it's a weird place to not be in a political party and to not. I mean, I see politics as like a multiple choice test every 4 years, a national game. I'm given a test, and the question is, who should hold this office? And the choices you're given are A and B, sometimes C, sometimes D. And as a citizen, you have to be responsible and choose the most right answer. And there's never a right answer. There's just a right answer, right? And so, not never a right one for me. But I'm saying that to say this, that if we could figure out a way to get folks to understand that there really is just one team, and it's the American human team, then we could talk to each other and make room and space for people that hate abortion but love the dignity of the mother that's in crisis. And those two shouldn't be separate. You know what I mean? Like that's like I hate abortion, but I truly respect the dignity of the mother that's in crisis, and that's a hard one for me. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think so many things are complex, right? And humans tend to we want things to be simple. We want them to be binary, black, white, wrong, right, Democrat, Republican, gay, straight, poor, rich, male, female.
That's a big one. You just said the word binary, and I had this conversation on Facebook last night with somebody I don't know, and it just got me going. And I was like, there aren't two sides to everything.
Yeah.
There is truth. I mean, it really does exist. Sometimes we have to find ourselves accepting more than one version of it, more than one perspective of it. But like, not everything has two sides. I've learned in practice of law that truth really exists. And I've told bazillions of clients at this point in my career, let's discover what the exact truth of this case or this issue is, and we will pursue that. And that, I mean, it could be that someone is guilty of a crime, but maybe there's a reason why.
Yeah.
So maybe it becomes a sentencing case, not a not guilty.
Yeah. With that, I mean, I think before we started recording, I told you why I reached out to you. For those folks that didn't hear that conversation, Sam was on Steve Nichols' radio show one morning. You were a regular pretty much once a week, right? I think you were.
Well, we had just started that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then you were kind of MIA because your dad had passed, right?
Yeah.
But you were having a conversation about legal cases or something, and I tuned in, and you said something that I had found to be true, that goes back to kind of this binary. You were talking about a client that was kind of intellectually challenged, and not only that, if I don't get this wrong, had a long life history of just terrible things, traumas, assaults that led up to this moment, that caused her to be in a legal predicament. And what I heard in that is what I've found to be the case, that, and it's true in my own life too, that people do things for reasons. I mean, I'm a social scientist. That's what we study. Like, why do people do what they do? And the assumption is that people aren't simply born bad or good, is that who we are is a combination of our kind of genetic makeup, epigenetic makeup, but also our experiences, our family, our culture, our moment in history, the meaning systems that are operating in that, in that moment of history. And we're just humans,
we're flawed, right?
We really are, because I think that's what it means to be human, right? And that's a very different thing than, and it's hard to do. I've said this multiple times on this podcast. I think I'm not concerned about the deity of Jesus. I am just so moved by the humanity of Jesus. Like, particularly the capacity to be tortured and ask God to forgive your torturers. like, and say they just don't know what they're doing, you know.
Well, have you ever done that? Have you ever had anybody crucify you? And of course, I mean that metaphorically.
Yeah.
But have you ever had anybody crucify you, and then in your private moment, find yourself remembering Jesus on the cross?
I'm not that good. I'm
Yeah, well,
I'm more retaliatory. Like, you know, again, it's kind of an ego thing, right? Because, yeah, I mean, I think we've all, depending on how we live our lives, right, have experienced betrayal, you know.
Oh yeah, of some sort. I mean, we've all been crucified in one way or
Right.
another. Sure.
When I think also for me, that story, not to get off on too much of a tangent, and the story of Christ is, are we going to leave the world? Are we going to try to love one another? And that's a challenge, right? Are we going to try to, you know, keep in mind that we're all humans and not throw too many stones? Are we going to reach out to the least of us? Are we going to be peacemakers? You know, are we going to treat women right? You know, I mean, there's some specifics. Are we going to chase wealth and power? You know, that it's not going to get you anywhere ultimately. Or are we going to try to create a human family here and foster that, right? And that's hard to do. You know, that's a challenge to do. And part of that, I think also, I see Christ as a political figure challenging power, challenging Roman Empire, right? Like, in speaking up for the least of these. And I think that's the other story of bearing a cross, right? There are going to be consequences if you challenge power, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get invited to the fancy insurance company parties.
Exactly.
Right. And I mean, and I'm perfectly cool with that.
Yeah, and there's a spectrum of the consequences too.
Yeah, right. I mean, I tell my children, right, that every choice you make, every choice has consequences.
Yeah.
And you can learn, and part of raising a child, I think, and part of learning to be a grown person is to figure out how to predict the consequences and then pursue the ones you want, right? So you go to school and get educated, well, you've got a degree. Well, do you want to practice law? Why would you go get a law degree if you don't want to do that, right? Yeah. And so, like, if you'd given me a medical degree, that would have been a nightmare for me. Like, that's not who I am, you know? Yeah. And so, you know, or an engineering or whatever. And so at the end of the day, you have to learn how to make choices that produce the right consequences. Here's the problem. Some consequences that are just and right are also really inconvenient and uncomfortable. Yeah. Right. And so, but I have learned, okay, I'm over 50 now. I know, I hate saying that, but I am. But I will tell you something. I've learned this, and I think it's true. If I'm comfortable and happy about where I am in terms of, like, if it's convenient and comfortable for me, I now know that that is now uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, like, if I'm in the middle of here, it's sort of my dad, God rest him, I miss him every single day, but he used to lovingly tell me, you know, we used to have this thing. He'd say zig and I'd say zag. And the reason he would do that was because I had this sort of innate ability that if the herd, okay, if the large group is zigging, he always said, you want to live, you want to succeed, you zag. if the group is going left, you go right.
Yeah, I would agree.
That's probably where it's safest. And we used to talk, and that was sort of the foundation of lots of our conversations about politics and religion and whatever. And so when everybody's carrying their torch in one way or another, I'm almost always assured that's the wrong direction. Yeah. I mean, though it's the most comfortable because you've got all that support right there around you, right?
Yeah.
So
certainty is a dangerous thing.
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah.
No, it's horrible. And I think, you know, I'll tell you, I think that's where the merit is in the argument against welfare. That's not against, but the negative argument of welfare, if I don't know how to say it, that conservatives make. I think there's wisdom in that. So I don't look at it and say, well, you're selfish and greedy and mean. But I do see the wisdom in not just throwing money at somebody every week or month, right? Because then you've created this sort of comfort level that undermines their dignity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
There's a fear there. And so how do you do that? How do you balance that? That's a question we have to have conversations about.
yeah.
Certainly don't be able to go hungry or
Well, I think that's the conversations that don't happen, right? Even locally. I mean, right now, well, actually, in 2019, 1 in 3 Valdostans were in poverty. That was pre-pandemic, right?
that
And
breaks my heart.
well, and I think, I mean, this, not to get off another tangent. I worked in the nonprofit sector for many years, been on boards, the typical stuff we do, and I'm pretty convinced that the industry of poverty, I mean, there's a difference between changing poverty and servicing poverty, being a social service agency. But I think you're right. I think we don't have these conversations about, well, why is 1 in 3 Valdostans in poverty? And it's not simply, to go back to our earlier point, I don't think it's simply that people are choosing to be in poverty, right? I think
No,
there's some bigger things going on. It's been interesting to hear conservatives kind of complain about the $15 minimum wage. And I think there's some legitimate questions that need to be raised about, so is that going to cause inflation? What are the consequences to small businesses? But I think we also have to recognize, and I've said this before, like we live in a country where the state had to impose a minimum wage.
right.
The state had to intervene and force people to pay a minimum, right? So all that's to say, you're right. I mean, I don't know any poor people that like their situation, and at the same time, Sam, I know plenty of rich folk who are lazy as hell, who don't do a damn thing, who don't spread the wealth that other people make them. And it's interesting how we never talk about that group of people, right?
Oh yeah.
Abusing the tax system, getting all kinds of subsidies and kickbacks. We don't call that welfare, right? But if poor folk are getting anything, we all seem to be pissed. I asked this guy about this recently. When I said, well, when Jesus broke the bread, he didn't ask for financial statements. It was.
No, he really, and he fed, and you got to assume there were some rich people in that crowd.
Oh, hell yeah.
So he fed the rich and the poor.
Yeah.
He fed whoever had a mouth,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So anyway, that's I'll get off my.
Well, but, ask yourself this question. One thing if anybody's watching this that I don't want to pay attention to, and you mentioned Steve Nichols a minute ago, and I want to give him a shout out.
Yeah. And for the record, I did invite him on. He's sick this morning, but we're going to hopefully connect. He's got a stomach.
Oh, well, good. Good. Yeah. One of the reasons, I've never been an advertiser, but one of the reasons I started supporting his show was because I actually believed him and still do, and think he's been wonderful for our community in lots of ways. He's made lots of room for alternative opinions and for trying to reconcile and bring even races together. He's had lots of African-American folks on, and I just found him to be healthy and a breath of fresh air compared to what I typically see in the way of conservative versus liberal, whatever. But one of the things he and I have always, or have talked about a lot over the years, has been that the idea that people have these attitudes about poor folks or rich folks or whatever. And the idea that it feels like people have this idea that if they just work hard enough, they'll be Jeff Bezos one day.
Yeah.
Newsflash, you won't. He got lucky. He was smart, and he got lucky at the time. And
it was timing too.
And he took tremendous advantage of our United States Postal Service, which is subsidized. Okay.
Yeah.
And he pays no taxes on top of that.
Which you could call a form of socialism too.
Well, it is social. No, it is. I mean, even the Catholic Church teaches that capitalism can exist without a little bit of socialism. And socialism is a horrible thing if that's all you have. And people confuse and conflate socialism with communism. I get into all that. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be, you're likely, I mean, it's almost impossible for you to be Jeff Bezos. You got a better shot at winning the lottery twice. Right? and you're probably not going to win at once. So the fact is, most of us are just normal, everyday working people that want to work and raise families and have kids that are better off a little bit than we are, right? And that's a good thing. Like, those are good. That's normal.
Yeah.
May sound boring, but take it from me. That's the best thing in life, is to have a family and
relationships again.
And so the question is why? The question is, where's that message coming from, and why is that message resonating with some people, and why are we having that argument? Because that seems like a silly argument to me. And I have a theory. And my theory stems back, and whoever's watching this that knows me is kind of rolling their eyes right now because
they've heard it before.
Say again?
Have they heard it before?
You have too, probably, but everybody's heard it. But I just can't help but say it because it just is so true to me. But it's this really weird, distorted system that we live in. We live in a system where corporations are persons, right? I don't know if you've ever given much thought to that.
Oh, I have. Citizens United. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, but that Citizens United is the tail of the snake.
Right.
Corporate personhood is the head of it. And that's a post-Civil War issue. That, 13th Amendment, that's a misreading and a distortion of the 13th Amendment. And it happened when nobody was looking, right? And nobody was paying attention. And so our founders hated corporations and realized, think about it. I mean, it's Exxon or whatever is a club in and of itself, separate from the American citizenry.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the earliest colonizing forces were corporations, like the East India Company. I mean, they've been around, haven't they?
They've been around, but our forefathers hated them. And the reason they hated them was because they knew how devastating they would be to an economy and to what they thought capitalism should be. Capitalism is you having a podcast, right? And somebody maybe paying $1 to see it or something. Okay,
it's free. I'm not.
No, I get that, but
yeah,
but that's the idea, right? So
lock in, kind of, you mix your labor.
I mean, so I own a cup of coffee and I can sell it to you for a profit. And the problem is when somebody like Starbucks owns all the coffee, right,
and can crush every competitor within.
Or like when Walmart shows up and destroys every small hardware store, small, family dime store, or my dad's grocery store. I'll never forget when they made a decision to sell the business.
So where was your dad's grocery store?
On South Patterson Street. It's where Blanton's was for years. We sold it to the Blantons.
Oh.
And it was a great store. I grew up in that store. But the point is, I'll never forget when Winn-Dixie moved down into Bratz Plaza. It was a major issue for my family. Yeah. Because here came now, so people, it cut us off from the Lake Park traffic, right? Because you'd stop and you would. It was probably a better place to shop. It was probably a cheaper place and all that.
Had more.
It had more choices and all that sort of stuff. Now you didn't get the beef, whatever. But and you could say, well, that's better for the culture. That's better for the people. The people got better food or whatever. But I don't think it is. I think that was unfortunately.
You are a liberal. You're talking about regulation now.
Well, I believe in regulation. I mean, you can hate me for it, but
I'm with you.
And let me tell you the problem with corporate personhood when we talk about regulation. So first of all, you get corporate personhood means you get these huge corporations that just steamroll through communities, and you see it all over. Yeah. I travel to Alabama every year to deer hunt with my kids several times, and we go through so many small towns, and it's just everything's a ghost. And it's like, well. And you ask yourself, what happened? What was going on here 60 years ago?
They pillage.
If you really slow down and look, you have these incredibly ornate brick buildings, these little towns and stuff, but just empty.
Yeah. But can I play devil's advocate on this one? A little bit. So, because I find it interesting, there are local companies, I won't name them, that are now kind of pushing the buy local. Right. And I lived in Portland for 4 years. You want to buy local kind of thing, right? It's very boutique there. But a lot of the companies, I guess this is my thing. I think you're absolutely right. The kind of box stores that come in and devastate a hardware store that's locally owned. But I got to tell you, Sam, back in the day, having worked for a lot of local businesses, and my friends did too, they didn't spread the wealth. Like they didn't pay people livable wages. There was very little to move up, especially not, I don't know if your family's what, if it was family owned, the kids always were the ones, right? They
Right, yeah.
And so there was a whole strata of folks that had nowhere to go. And we won't get into all the ones, I don't know if you encountered this, but all the ones I worked for are just racist. Like just weren't going to hire people, black folks, right? Well, let me finish though. Let me finish. You know, so now, I mean, I think one of the things, I don't know if you remember this as a kid, but I remember 2 or 3 kind of dynasty families here in Valdosta that I won't name that were pretty consistent about keeping outside companies out because they didn't want to have to raise labor costs.
Right. No, that's
right. And so one of the things, and I'm not a corporate guy, but I will say this, corporations who don't have to play local politics the way local businesses do, have opened the doors for a few folks that the local folks just locked out. It's terrible, right? Now the local businesses are crying foul. And I know you're not a conservative, but this is one of the things I bring up with my conservative friends that complain about this. Well, this is the market. This is how monopolistic capitalism works. Walmart's just doing what the local hardware store probably did. They're just doing it writ large, right? In a way that just crushes and cannibalizes.
And they're not real. Walmart is a terrible example if you're using it this way.
Well, we can say Home Depot, we can do Lowe's, we can do PetSmart, we go down the litany, right? Not to mention how homogenizing that is and how it makes communities boring.
Have you ever noticed? I was going to tell you.
Jesus.
Community now is within a mile or 2 of an interstate, and they all look
strip mall.
They all look the same.
Yeah,
that's right. They all look the same. It's not as fun.
But we're guilty of this too, though, because I don't know if you remember this as a kid. I think Americans, we call it in sociology, it's the Mcdonaldization of America.
Okay.
There's an old book on this, right? But I remember as a kid, like everybody here couldn't wait till we got Red Lobster. Like we were going to arrive when we get Red Lobster, and then it was the Olive Garden. Right. It's interesting to me that a lot of these communities would rather have a chain like Olive Garden than Italians in the community making real Italian food.
Right.
You know, so I think there's some dynamics that are really complex that excluded people. I mean, for example, is there a Lebanese restaurant here?
Well, Mo's Mediterranean downtown is.
But it's really kind of.
I think he's Lebanese, but we all.
Yeah. But also Greek and right.
Yeah. But it's like going. But you go down to Fort Myers, for instance, and you can get some obvious chain stuff, but you want to find the Greek fish houses there.
Yeah, but I mean, my point is simply this: that as people assimilate, right, as they kind of homogenize to the dominant group. Right. All these things that we kind of could have benefited from, you know what I'm saying? Like it would have been rich and cool if folks weren't. Sam, this is no lie. My parents, we lived in Turkey for 2 years. When I was a kid. Yeah. They traveled the globe. My dad was a military guy. My parents never had a taco. They never had Mexican food because they were so convinced it would upset their stomach.
That's awesome.
I know they have no. You know what I'm saying?
I get the reference.
Oh my God! Like they have no. I don't think we ever had Turkish food. We went to the commissary, and had this kind of processed crap. That
the
GI. You know what I mean? I mean, this kind of fear and paranoia of anything that's not us is so. It robs life of what makes life rich. Sometimes
I agree. And what's interesting to me, though, is that a lot of that is we are on the cusp, in my opinion, of great opportunity, right? Because you've got this incredible tool, it's called the internet. And look at us, I have no idea where you are, but we're talking to each other over the internet, right? So, but what I mean by that is, like I told you, I think before we started, I'm a member of this Lebanese food group on Facebook. It's amazing, man.
Oh, yeah.
Share some great family recipes.
Yeah.
I discovered a distant cousin yesterday on there.
Yeah.
And, and my point is like that we're in that moment now where we could see everybody's differences and we should not respond to that with contempt, anger, distrust, fear. We should respond to it. And there's some things, by the way, that aren't awesome.
Yeah.
Sheep's tongue is one of them. I've tried it. But you should, I mean, although I will tell you that I'm the only person that thinks that's ever tried it.
Yeah.
But the point is like, there's just so much to wonder at, right? And to be enamored with in this world. And it doesn't really take effort. It actually takes effort to be negative and contemptuous. Fearful. It takes no effort to just look at stuff and go, what is that? You know,
Yeah.
Sheep's tongue. Well, I've never thought about eating a sheep's tongue. What are we doing?
Well, getting back to kind of your theory of what's going on, like I think there's something else going on. This is the lens that I look through the world at, is that, you know, the demographics have been put out for, you know, for 20, 30 years now by social scientists who said, look, the country's browning. You know, white folks are not making babies at the rates other folks are.
I think that's tied to corporate personhood too, but okay.
It's certainly cashed in on, like, you know, when it's politically expedient. I think this is one of the things I've talked to. Well, for example, the market will determine people's morality in some ways. Like
it teaches
sometimes, you know, and at some point I hope we can talk again, because I think people confuse morality and legality, and they're not always the same either.
No, right? That's right.
Yeah, but
they're pretty close, but not all.
Yeah, we're in this historic moment where white folks are recognizing that for the first time, for example, in this state, Black folks, if they actually vote, have significant political power, right? And having lived in the whitest state or whitest city in the country,
if they vote in unity.
True that, right? And there's problems again with the Democrats using folks of color as a swing vote and all that. But it's when I lived in Oregon, what was fascinating to me there is that everybody can be progressive because it's a white place, and they can slam the South as if, you know, we're the bunch of racists down here, when in fact, I guarantee you, and you can look at their history, when people from Mississippi migrated there to build ships for World War II, they encountered what they encountered in Mississippi, and worse at times.
And there's a level of intolerance about things other than race that come with
absolutely,
places,
absolutely,
you know? So
right.
That I don't really sign up for.
Yeah, well, I guess this is why the divisive, one-sided media concerns me. Why I reached out to Steve, why I've reached out to the mayor, is whether it's Rachel Maddow and MSNBC and CNN. I mean, CNN is just vulgar at this point. And you know, it's just laughable. Their news is about them half the damn time. I don't care what Don Lemon thinks. You know, I don't want to see Don Lemon get outraged. What is that? You know, so we've got this polarized media, these media outlets that are cashing in on this division that they're fueling a lot of times. I mean, and again, we're playing into that with one another. You know, it's interesting because Scott said this, and so has Steve, like, you know, all these kind of the 70, and my liberal friends don't want to grapple with why 74 million people voted for Donald Trump. But it's interesting to hear conservative talk radio show hosts who are all white men say, well, all these people have something legitimate to be mad about. But then I go, well, for 20 or 30 years, y'all have been telling them that they're being victimized by all these people that are coming to take their country, whether it's immigrants, whether it's Muslims, whether it's feminists. We can go down a litany of things, right? So hell yeah, they're mad, but you've had a hand in playing, you know, you've told them that the Democrats are Islamists, you know, and Jeff, or they're socialists. You think Jeff Bezos has given up his money? Are you serious? Right? So this kind of gets us at why I wanted to talk with you. Like, I fear that we're participating in our own destruction. I fear that those of us who claim to follow Jesus aren't really serious about that at times. And I'm not sure what to do about that. And I also said when we weren't on the recording, like I know so many wonderful people that have fled places like this that didn't really want to leave, but they weren't conservative. you know, and they were labeled and stigmatized and didn't find a community,
Right.
and have gone all over the country. And that's robbed this place of an enormous amount of talent. And let me say one more thing, then I'll shut up, I promise. The other thing that concerns me, and I don't think we're serious about it, as long as we stay regressive here and one-sided here, there aren't going to be good paying jobs. You know, corporations don't want to come to places with Confederate statues on public property. They don't want brand damage, you know, not brain damage, brand damage.
I get it. No, I get it.
You know, and if our leaders are serious about growth, if they're serious about reducing crime, if you want to reduce crime, let's improve the economic status of most folks. We know they're related. When people have good paying jobs, they're not going to steal from people. They don't. Everything goes down when the economy's good. Domestic violence, divorce, substance abuse, crime, it all goes down when people have meaning and meaningful jobs. So if we're going to, you know, are we just going to bring in more, you know, things that create 4 or 5 jobs for a few people, right, that don't really make any you know, economic impact? Or are we going to really change some things so people could have a better standard of living? Last thing, I promise this will be the last thing. The thing that's depressed me over the years, just doing race work here and trying to have conversations, back in '93, I was sent to negotiate between the black and white Christmas parades. In 1993, we had segregated Christmas parades in this community, right?
I was in law school, so I didn't know.
Yeah, like, good grief. So I got to go do this, but I have repeatedly, and others have too, gone before local leaders and said, look, we have an opportunity, just like you said a minute ago. It can either be a crisis or it can be an opportunity. It's really up to us. We can model to the rest of the country how you do reconciliation, how you face your past courageously in a way that doesn't dehumanize anybody. And we can teach the rest of the country to do that as we figure out how to do it, which could be marketed. You know, I mean, it could be an economic opportunity in Middle Ways to have a civil rights museum, or, you know, all kinds of other things. And not only
or
that,
to go over to Montgomery and buy
exactly. You know, the EJI, that lynching museum over there, has a budget of $58 million.
I know.
You know, so if you know, if we actually have those conversations and come together as a community, that could be an incredible benefit. That then when progressive companies or corporations that are worried about, hey, if we set up, because we got the cheapest labor in the country. I mean, it's no accident that we've got plenty of folks that need good jobs. We got a high level of poverty, but it's not accidental that folks aren't bringing their corporations here. Everybody here hates unions, right? You know, they're communist, right? So why aren't they coming to kind of take advantage of the labor? You know,
well,
so
what's interesting, no, you don't shut up. I just, you know, it's interesting to me because, you know, this goes back to what I think the root cause is. You sort of said we're participating in our own demise. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
When I listen to that, I think you're right. But here's the question: is why? We're not knowingly doing it. Here's what I mean. Think about this. As a culture, we fought hard for a progressive tax rate. Who's around now that thinks that's awesome?
Yeah.
We fought for a constitutional amendment and amended the Constitution as a people, and the oligarchs hated that, right?
Yeah.
We still do. We knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
All right. We fought like hell. Think about Clarence Darrow and think about his history and legacy. He fought like you wouldn't believe for the unions and have unions. But who thinks unions are good now? Right. Well, the question is, how are we educating? Okay. Now, you think about this for a minute. I train dogs, and my wife gets so mad at me when I compare raising children to training dogs.
I won't say anything about that because I don't.
No. But let me defend myself for a second. It makes sense to me because dogs, it's muscle memory, right? So you know if you treat a dog well and you love a dog and you routinely make them heal on one side or
Yeah.
the other. And yeah, that's what
Positively reinforce it.
yeah, you get all this wonderful, you get a wonderful animal that's a great part of your family. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's beautiful and it's predictable, right? You can take a 6-week-old, 8-week-old puppy. I mean, unless there's some genetic defect,
Right.
I can predict for you what kind of dog that dog's going to be, especially if I know a little bit about the people that are going to be around it, right?
Yeah.
The input, the programming, the
Socialization.
all that's input, right?
Yeah.
Well, I want you to just bear with me for a second and listen to this, all right? And think about this for a second. People, human beings, little babies are born in this country, right? And have been now, right, for however many years we've been in existence. But I want you to think about what they're learning and from whom are they learning it. Well, there's a little bit from your parents these days, not much, frankly. And so you're getting it off of YouTube or CNN or Fox or whatever.
Or your friends, your peers.
Kid,
or your peers.
Yeah, well, no, you are generally a result. What is it? The average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. Yeah. That's who you are. And so, but if you're hanging out with television, hanging out with Facebook, hanging out with whatever, then that's going to mold who you are. And that's what's happened for a couple of generations. Here's why I think I'm right about this. Corporate personhood, okay, through the legal fiction, the legal technicality of corporate personhood, different corporations have constitutional rights, which blows my mind. Okay. These are supposed to be inalienable rights endowed by our common creator. Well, God in any form didn't care about Apple. God didn't create Apple. Yeah. He just didn't. He doesn't care about Apple at all, right? I mean, so at the end of the day, they have constitutional rights. What does that mean? Well, QAnon is a person and has constitutional rights. And they're doing what? Making money for their shareholders. Well, how do they, or for whoever's in charge, right? Whoever gets the payday for that. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means I'm going to give you what you want.
You have to.
When you look at your phone,
yeah,
and I click on it and I read an article in the New York Times, guess what they think of me? He's a liberal. And they see where I slow down. Yeah. Artificial intelligence is clearly there. Yeah. They see so they don't care about teaching me good stuff. They care about holding my attention so they can sell me this new cup of coffee or
well, there's another dimension to this though. They're also mining you. You're the product.
Right. Social Dilemma, if you watch that.
Yeah.
They make that point. I think they're right about it. But they get to that, right? So if you told me the election's stolen, as an example, I'm curious. I mean, who would make up such a thing?
Yeah.
Right. So I want to read about it. Well, and as a man who lives a really conservative life, I mean, I do.
Yeah.
I'm appalled that there'd be fraud and that our election would be unfair. Yeah. I'd be appalled by that.
Yeah. We all should be, right?
Right. So I will read about it, and through artificial intelligence, because I have anything in a couple of minutes, it dings me again and says, "Hey, read this." Right. Yeah. And then before you know it, I have learned that CNN is junk, and I better start watching Fox or flip it.
Yeah.
Whatever the issues, I'll learn that Fox is junk. And so at the end of the day, we end up in these echo chambers, right? Because we're consuming in a never-ending never-ending attempt by these corporate persons to sell us crap. Yeah. And so, if they can manipulate our ideas, they can make us do right. So if I manipulate your ideas into thinking you need Viagra, you'll buy it.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, this is what bothers me. Because at the end of the day, we talk about regulation a second. Here's the issue for me. I believe in regulation that protects you and me. I could care less about a big corporation. Don't care about them. Don't even care. And let me say something that'll be very controversial. I don't even care about the jobs they create. You know why? Because there are jobs there without them. There's 330 million people in this country. If you unleash 330 million people with real true freedom, where you actually acknowledge, respect, and protect their dignity, guess what will happen? There'll be jobs. jobs that pay well. And if they don't pay well, if you've got somebody like you're talking about, a family business that's racing and paying $8 an hour, we raise the minimum wage. It is ridiculous to say you have to do that, but you do, because there's greed in the world. We're humans, right? But at the end of the day, I don't understand the idea of giving all of our resources, all of our ideas, all of our conversations over to a person who has no soul and no conscience.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to me.
Well, I think there's another dangerous thing that I don't hear anybody talk about, is that there's a lag time between the technological advancements and legislation. Like, if we have lawmakers who don't understand the technology, how in the hell are they going to pass laws and regulations that reel any of that in?
Well, first of all, I would tell you you're right, but I think you're at step one. And even if you accomplish step one, you'll never get to step two unless you undermine corporate personhood. Here's why.
So does that make them more liable? Is that why you're making this case?
Well, not really yet. Corporations have not yet destroyed the Seventh Amendment, but they're working on it and they're getting there. It's what you hear in terms of tort reform and all that. But no, let me tell you what I mean by that. Yeah. Everyone, save maybe Bernie Sanders and AOC, and they're not, and they still have some corporate money. Okay, I'm not,
absolutely, yeah,
right. But you got people in let me say it this way: that government, those people in the Capitol, they're ours. They're supposed to be representing me and their constituents in whatever jurisdiction they're from. Here's the problem: they don't.
Yeah, and I would say they can't anymore, even if they want.
Well, look, if you elected me to anything, if you elected me to Atlanta, to go to the House or whatever, do you think I'm going to return your phone call or the CEO of Coca-Cola or Georgia?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, really? And so the point is, right, and those companies are important. They do good things. They have lots of, I'm glad we can buy Coca-Cola. That's awesome. But it doesn't make our society, right?
You don't have to convince me of this. Like,
no, I know, but I'm excited about it because it's shocking to me.
But the stock market, Sam, the stock market is doing great.
Lord have mercy.
No, that's not, no, seriously. Like, I mean, we got to deal with that, right? That is.
Let me talk to you about something we got to undo. Again, that's part of the miseducation that these corporations are giving us as individuals. Have you ever eaten a stock market?
No, you don't have to. Yeah.
Well, have you ever like built one and lived in it? I mean,
no, I get it. Well, and not only that, but let's just talk about stock for a second, because it kind of goes back to what you said earlier. And I had this conversation with somebody, libertarian or somebody, but when I buy stock in a company, whether it's ADM or whether it's Coke, I don't care what they do. All I want is the stock to increase in value. And you know what I'm saying? In that, built into the logic of corporate capitalism is dehumanization, environmental degradation. We go down the list, right? And not only that, none of that's Christian. I mean, the other conversation I'd love to have is, was Jesus a capitalist?
No. And so, at the end of the day, although I think he would say, if I did work, or if you do work for X number of hours or days or whatever, that you should pay whatever it is we agreed on. Yeah. That it's
reasonable.
Just. He would believe in just. I mean, if you gave of yourself for it, you should receive payment, or a product or whatever. But here's what you're saying is exactly what I'm saying. You give this corporation constitutional rights, and through personhood, they then have the right to do whatever they want to do under the Constitution. They then essentially own the government, right? So it's not the United States; it's the United Corporation of America.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have the president you want. You have the president either Exxon wants or Apple wants. That's
and that's Donald Trump or Barack Obama or whoever, right?
Look,
now I think Donald Trump. This is why I'd love to talk to conservatives. I think Donald Trump did upset the oligarchy. I think he pissed
He
off.
upset a different oligarch.
He did, yeah.
Part of the oligarch.
But it's worth kind of looking into, I think.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I've said a million times, I understood when Donald Trump ran in 2016, I understood that when folks got enamored with him, I understood the strong desire for change. I had to. I still have it.
Yeah.
I never understood him as the agent of that change.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's
how
desperate some folks were, though.
Well,
for change.
Absolutely. But so in terms of Christianity, I want to say this. First of all, the idea that an entity is a person is an absolute direct frontal assault on human life and human dignity. And that's more important to me than abortion, the death penalty, or anything. And I'm very serious about those other subjects. But here's why. You and I will never compete with a corporation.
Yeah.
Not in a courtroom, not in life, not in capitalism, nothing. And so everybody was getting upset about the fact that Donald Trump got kicked off Twitter or whatever, right? They were calling it censorship. And when it's not censorship from a legal standpoint, because the government's not doing it, except that they own your government, so you really should be mad about it.
Yeah. Well, I just argued, with my conservative friends, like that's the market at work. Like it's a private service. Like, I didn't agree with them deplatforming folks, but
me neither.
But you can't have it both ways. If you want to argue free market economics, this is a byproduct of that.
But here's the point, though, right? And you mentioned that corporations earlier. I think you said something like they provided better paying jobs and race.
Well, no, I think they broke up local monopolies, and because oligarchy can happen on the local level too. You can have 4 or 5 families that own major industries, right, that depress wages and have enough political clout to keep out any potential competitors.
But that's who I'm talking about. I mean, you look locally, and that's what the problem you've got.
Yeah.
Locally, you've got, I won't mention it either, but there's $10, $15 an hour folks. It could be $45 an hour for GM.
Yeah.
Whatever, right?
Yeah.
So you're right. And so that part of it is absolutely good. The reality, though, and what I want to mention is that when you think about the disengagement of humanity from when you invest in the stock market, for instance, what's happening is these folks are taking the system, working within it, and it's eating us alive. And this is what I mean. A corporation is a human. It's a human under our law, and it has no soul, no conscience, virtually all of our resources and money. And it is required by law to be selfish. But I don't get that. That's just utterly ridiculous, because what that does is it creates what I now call radical corporate capitalism.
Yeah.
And that undermines human life and human dignity at every turn. It's why you have people that really do think that birth control is okay. All right, I'm a Catholic. Okay. I'm not advocating for, making birth control illegal. I'm just saying, but there's people out there that are like, we're just going to have one child because we can't afford 2, right? I've got 4. I couldn't afford any of them. And so,
even as an attorney,
I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, but that's baked into the people's reason, right? And
well, did you ever read Marx?
Of course I read Marx.
Okay, well, you can't say that.
I sadly went to I should say sadly, I'm grateful for all the sociology I learned at Valdosta State University.
Yeah, because all this is some of his critique, right? You need to. There's a great book that kind of lays out everything. It's called Democracy Incorporated by Sheldon Woolen, and he argues there was a corporate coup d'etat at one point that happened.
He's right. I'll read it, but I can tell you that's correct.
His analysis is just spot on, right? And so again, as the people are divided over conservative liberal. Like
because we've consumed those
yeah,
ideas,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because
Well,
there's
and
no
and
such
and they have to keep us divided in order to pull all that off. You know,
right.
one of the things I keep saying to my radical friends and my conservative friends, like, if we don't like the government, let's don't fund it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, just don't. Let's have a mass movement where we don't pay our income tax until there's serious change, until these laws change, you know.
The problem is nobody agrees on what the change should be. Right?
That's true. That's the struggle, right?
And so, well, but the change has to be fundamental, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree.
That's why I'm part of the whole move to amend stuff. I think that I invest some time and effort in trying to convince legislators, even in the state of Georgia, to move to ratify a proclamation, even that they would amend the Constitution, federal Constitution, to outlaw corporate personhood. I don't understand that. Like, I don't. It's a fundamental truth to me that only people are people. You know what I mean?
But if we have a situation where, as you said earlier, even state legislatures or legislators are in the pockets oftentimes of corporations.
They are. But one thing we did learn in the last 4 years, we knew this already, but we were reminded of it. If enough people demand it,
yeah.
Here's what I know about every politician, and I hope they all watch this. Every politician I know will absolutely vote however the mob tells them.
Yeah. Well, that's the history of the country, I would argue.
Well, and in theory, that's where the power comes from that. And then it's balanced in the court systems, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think let me reframe it. I would argue it's always been about social movements. It's been about whether it's women's suffrage, not working children in factories, civil rights, gay rights, workers' rights, environmental rights. We go down the list. It's when the public says no more. And even the Trump phenomenon is a fascinating movement in its own right. It's very complicated. But then what we do is leverage politicians to do things, you know, that they probably wouldn't otherwise do, or maybe not even think to do.
Well, as long as we don't move them to do something different, they're happy to vote for more cuts for Coca-Cola. You know?
Absolutely.
And I'm of the mindset now that that's one fundamental thing we can do. Yeah. What to me that does is it begins to regulate certain areas of our society that need it, like the news business. Yeah. I mean, either your news or your entertainment, and there has to be strict regulation on what or who gets to call themselves news, right? And so you can watch Fox or CNN as long as it says, you know, cable news, entertainment network or whatever. Then, you know, it's got to say that because it's
conservatives are going to have this free will argument, you know, that this is all about choice, that we're not. I think that's I think that's the other thing that's hard for Americans to grapple with is how much I think we all believe we're just making choices because we're all free, when in fact, no, we're being bombarded and shaped and
the question is not, I mean, I've always said this, it isn't the choice that's powerful. It's the ability to provide the choice. Right? So if I'm the guy that's giving you CNN or Fox, I'm winning, baby.
Yeah.
I'm winning all day long. And I don't care which one you tune into, doesn't make any difference to me.
Yeah.
You know, if more of you tune into Fox, we'll charge more for those ad dollars, you know, spots. And so at the end of the day, it's so you think you got a choice between Trump and
you get to choose two evils.
Well, but it's also this is my example for that. Then I'll shut up so we can do whatever you want to do, including end if you're ready. My example is this, you know, my 3 children at the dinner table every night, let's just say that I sit down with them and say, okay, kids, we're going to try democracy. You can have bottled water or tap water, but that's all you're getting tonight, right? And then one of them says, well, I want a hamburger. Yeah, that sounds good, but that's not on the menu.
Yeah.
I don't bottle water, tap water. Well, then they start arguing. And one says, well, the plastic in the bottled water causes cancer. And the other one says, well, tap water is not clean, there's lead in the pipes. So they start arguing and fussing and fighting. Some of them become tap water, opponents, and some become bottled water, and they hate each other, right? Well, then they finally take a vote. We call the question, they got a vote. 2-1, bottled water. Okay, I'll be right back. And I go into the kitchen, right? Take 3 empty bottles and I fill them up with tap water and bring them back.
Exactly.
You get it? And that's what every 4 years, that's what we do. And it's all bleh. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so, although I do think that the Trump phenomenon was consequential on lots of different.
I think they're still reeling from it too.
No, I do too. I think, and we're going to be studying that for a long time. And I think it's still, it's bothersome on lots of levels.
Yeah.
Not because I'm angry or mad at people that supported him or whatever, but because I think that their desire for change is true. I think it was right. I just didn't understand him. And I'm not willing to sell the country's ideas of American government just to get that change, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we have to break up the monopoly on our system's choices, right? So, I mean, who ran for governor? I saw some young kid on TV. It may have been on CNN, I think. I don't even know. He's from North Carolina, like 30 years old or something. I don't know. He's looked like a kid to me, but he's a representative, maybe. Yeah. And I was listening to him, and then I did a little bit of I was talking to somebody on the phone. I think we were both talking about, and it was obvious he's pretty much paid for his position, right? Yeah. I don't know if that's true. That's just a rumor. And I just think, and he's having these esoteric conversations about the illegality of the voting in Wisconsin. And then the pundit said, well, wait a minute, North Carolina did the same thing. And he had to backpedal, right? Yeah. And it's like, I mean, you're just really and truly, you're just being hired to say that. You're not, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, you vote, you get voted on and people vote for you, but I mean, and then they recycle the ideas every 4 years, election's important once every 4 years, that kind of thing. Anyway, so I put all that out there to say, for me personally, that seems to be the starting point to me. Because I do think there were times when we had really great ideas in this country, bad things like slavery and whatnot that were really, really bad that we had to correct. But we seem to think about government differently 2 or 3 generations ago than we do now, I think.
Yeah, I'd definitely say it, but at least 1 generation. Yeah,
that's probably true.
Well, Sam, thank you. We're at 2 hours, so I'm going to let you go.
Are you serious? Has it been that long?
We're at 2 hours. Yeah, that's
sad. Good thing this is free.
Exactly. These aren't billable hours. I'm sorry, and I really.
Oh, they're not. I don't get to send you a bill.
You can send me a bill, but good luck with that. But I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.
I've loved it. I'm looking forward to watching some of the episodes I haven't seen yet.
Yeah, they're all over the place, from libertarianism to anarchism to all kinds of stuff. So the idea was to get some voices out there that don't get heard, and I have talked to a few conservatives, and hopefully more of that'll happen. But
let's get some atheists on there. I love.
One of my college roommates, an atheist, who was a Methodist minister here as an atheist.
Oh, that's cool. That's super. I love.
So that's an episode. It's an episode called "The Atheist Minister" or something like that. So you would love a smart guy, just brilliant. Like, got in Yale out of high school and just ended up here because he didn't have any money. He's a great guy, but just one of those long-term friends that's just beautiful human.
Well, I love atheists so much. I really do.
Some of my atheist friends are very religious about their atheism, though.
Well, it's funny, and then I whenever I tell them my story about not believing that God's an old gray-haired man in the sky, I always perk up, and I'm like, to that extent, we agree.
If you I don't know if you've got Netflix. If any of that interests you, you should watch Hail Satan.
Okay.
It's a documentary. It's not what you think it is, but
Is it kid appropriate or not?
maybe PG-17 or whatever it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
For my kids, I'll probably hold off.
Yeah, it's kind of more adult oriented, but it's pretty fascinating. I had Satanists as students in Portland as well, and they did enormous charity work every winter. Like, yeah, I'm telling you, it's an interesting thing. It's not what we think Satanism is, for the record. Yeah,
I have no doubt that that's true. I mean,
yeah.
you know, when I was a kid, I used to read a lot of stuff about the church, the Christian church, and Satanism. When I went to law school, I spent some time as a hobby with law school study friends who would take breaks from studying law. We studied religions, and so we learned a little bit about the Mormonism or Baptism. And boy, you know, everybody should do that.
Yeah, I agree.
Everybody should study religion. Everybody should do that. You should know.
I think we should test our faith. I think we should, you know, go out and read what other people believe.
Absolutely. I mean, I test.
Yeah.
That's why I got no problem with people.
Yeah. Like,
I'm like, yeah, good. Challenge me, because I probably either know the answer, don't know the answer, or they need to go look it up, or I need to reconcile with it.
Yeah, I changed my mind.
Isn't that weird that you might change your mind? I mean, that's crazy. You know?
Yeah,
all right, dude. I know you got stuff to do, and I enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Malik.
Maybe do it again down the road. I'd love to continue the conversation.
Anytime you want. And you can tell, like, I am my dad's son. I will talk to the post.
That's all right. It's also very Southern.
Well, fair enough. That's true.
So are you cool with posting this like it is?
Yeah, I don't care.
Okay. Sounds good.
I don't ever say anything that I won't take. You know, if I said something wrong and somebody calls me on it, I'll be glad to change my mind. You know?
Yeah, me too. Me too. Well, thank you.
All right, big guy. See you, man.